Good morning and welcome to Chapter 4. Just some quick thoughts on Chapter 4. Um, this is the chapter on birth. We probably all know people who have given birth. Maybe some of you have given birth. Maybe some of you have attended when someone else gave birth. This is a really exciting, wonderful, exciting time. As a psychologist, I find it ironic that we look at something like birth and we say, oh my God, that's horrible, and the pain is horrible. Personally, I never went through it, never wanted to. Actually, I did go through it because I was one being born many years ago. But here's the thing, that most people, when they think back, they see their child, they go, God, I'm just so glad to have this child. That kind of mutes the whole memory of it. However, when pressed, the memory of it is often negative or horrible. A lot of people think, I'd never go through that again. Now, here's the thing. Here we're looking at the birth process. But remember, this is primarily about child psychology. We're not only interested in the whole biology of it. We're really interested in how do we as folks develop? How do we become who we are? So here we have one person inside of another who needs to come out. And so there is that. The first stage of this, something that a lot of people don't know, is that the person who starts the whole process is the baby. The baby is the one that released the hormone that tells the mother to go into labor. Now, we can induce labor and all that, so it doesn't have to be the baby, but that's something to remember. Consequently, we should remember that as far as child psychology, that we as people, and I'm looking at us as the children, we as people show volition from the very beginning. It is the baby that decides when to be born. It is the baby who is learning, is going to be learning, and is going to be playing, is going to be working, and all. I think sometimes people tend to think of their children just as these passive receptacles. Well, they're not, and they didn't even start out that way. So let's keep that in mind. First stage is the labor. The second stage is the birth of the child, and the third stage is the birth of the placenta, or the afterbirth. Remember, there's placenta in there, so you got to get it out. So there's the afterbirth. Check that out, and check out also the questions about where the birth is going to be had, where a lot of people now like to go to the birthing center, because this is a lot nicer or warmer or friendlier than the hospital. A lot of people have their children at home. That's not a new idea. People probably had their children at home for thousands of years before hospitals came about in the first place. You also have, choices about who's going to deliver the baby. So you have doctors, you have nurses, you have midwives, you have doulas, and the doulas are the people that probably have given birth or know a lot about that, can just kind of give good advice. Doulas don't actually deliver the baby, as far as I know. Maybe in an emergency could. So there's those kinds of choices. This is relationship building. This is attachment. This is the first, or not the first, but part of many opportunities that parents and caregivers have to interact with their children, to develop relationships. So these kinds of questions to be answered, where and how and who and all this, these are good questions, important questions to ask. I think there's something else to this, because this is dependent upon mother, especially, and to some degree, maybe family members, father, and other people like that, making a decision on how. There are choices there. Then there's also the way it actually happens, which means that if there's an emergency or something, the child might be delivered by C-section. The child might have to come at the hospital rather than home like planned. What this means is that we have this, we might have this interplay between what was wanted and intended and what actually happened. This might set up a situation where there's some stress in the relationship between the parent and child, the caregiver and child. So also the question is a good number of women experience some hormonal differences, or hormones are there while the child's in utero during pregnancy. Then you have, once the child's born, so you have these changes, hormonal changes, which can lead to psychological events like excuse me, like postpartum depression. The question here is we're looking at opportunities to develop relationship, opportunities to set up the kinds of relationships that'll be conducive to positive people building, okay? And not, keep in mind, not everything is within our control, and for that reason, some people kind of have some negative events here. Nothing is really insuperable. I mean, you can always get over stuff. You can always overcome it, especially with love. But we need to take into account this. I point these items out because I want you to understand that child psychology is not just about learning how all this stuff happens and all the terms for it and all this. Child psychology is about trying to understand people who are children and adolescents. Okay, so I hope y'all have a wonderful week. I hope you enjoy this chapter. Maybe you can take a trip down memory lane. Now, I don't think many people remember being born, but you might remember being a part of the birth process at some point in some other capacity. Anyway, y'all have a great week. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in chapter 5.